The mahogany-paneled conference room at Harrington & Associates law firm felt too small for the weight of family tension it contained. 12 of us sat around an oval table, avoiding eye contact while making small talk about the unseasonably warm October weather. No one mentioned Grandma Eleanor or why we were really there, to divvy up what she'd left behind after 93 years of life. My name is Rebecca Morgan. I sat between my younger brother Jason and our cousin Michael, unconsciously picking at my cuticles, a nervous habit my grandmother had always gently corrected with a tap on my hand and a knowing smile. Across the table, Uncle Robert checked his Rolex for the third time in 5 minutes while Aunt Diane scrolled through her phone, her red lacquered nails clicking against the screen. My mother, Catherine, Grandma Eleanor's only daughter, sat perfectly still, her face a careful mask that revealed nothing of whatever storm might be brewing inside. We were waiting for Mr. Harrington, Grandma's attorney for over 40 years, to begin the reading of her will. The family hadn't gathered like this since her funeral 6 months ago, a sparsely attended affair that stood in stark contrast to the crowded holiday dinners and birthday celebrations of years past. I'd flown in from Chicago, taking 2 days off from my job teaching high school English. Jason had driven up from his college town 3 hours away, but many of the faces I'd expected to see had been noticeably absent that rainy April morning. "He's certainly taking his time," Uncle Robert muttered, breaking the silence as he checked his watch again. "Some of us have businesses to run." "I'm sure he'll be here shortly," my mother replied, her voice carrying that particular blend of politeness and warning I remembered from childhood disagreements with her brother. As if summoned by their exchange, the door opened and Mr. Harrington entered, his silver hair immaculately combed, his bow tie perfectly centered. Behind him, a younger associate wheeled in a small cart with a laptop and portable projector. "My apologies for the delay, Mr. Char," Harrington said, settling into the chair at the head of the table. "Technical issues with the equipment. Mrs. Eleanor Morgan was very specific about how today's proceedings should unfold." A ripple of confusion moved through the room. Technical issues? Equipment? The standard script for these situations involved documents and signatures, not whatever Mr. Harrington's assistant was setting up. "Is all this really necessary?" Aunt Diane asked, finally putting her phone away. "We're all busy people, and I'm sure Eleanor's wishes could be summarized efficiently." Mr. Harrington's expression remained professionally neutral, though I caught a flicker of something, disapproval perhaps, in his eyes. Mrs. Morgan left explicit instructions that her will be read in its entirety, followed by a video message she recorded 3 weeks before her passing. She was quite adamant about the procedure. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence carried an edge of unease. A video message? Grandma Eleanor had barely managed her ancient flip phone. What could she possibly have recorded, and why? As Mr. Harrington opened his leather portfolio and removed a thick document, I couldn't shake the feeling that Grandma had orchestrated one final family gathering, and that none of us were prepared for what she had to say. The Morgan family fortune began with my great-grandfather's timber business in the 1920s, which my grandfather Howard transformed into a diversified investment company after World War II. By the time I was born, the family name was attached to several buildings downtown and a wing at the regional hospital. Not obscenely wealthy by national standards, but certainly the kind of old money that carried weight in our mid-sized Midwestern city. Grandma Eleanor hadn't been born into this privilege. She was a nurse when she met my grandfather, the daughter of immigrant parents who had emphasized education and hard work above all else. Even after marriage elevated her social status, she maintained a pragmatic approach to wealth, generous but never ostentatious, careful but never miserly. She continued volunteer nursing well into her 70s and ran the family's charitable foundation until her health began declining 3 years ago. The family dynamics around me reflected decades of complex relationships. Uncle Robert, my mother's older brother, had taken over the family business when Grandpa died 15 years ago. His wife, Diane, had never quite been accepted by Grandma Eleanor, who found her preoccupation with social status distasteful. Their children, my cousins Michael and Jennifer, had grown up with advantages I could barely comprehend. Private schools, European vacations, cars on their 16th birthdays. My mother had chosen a different path, marrying my father, a university professor with no family money of his own. Their relationship had introduced the first real class divide into the Morgan family, something that became more pronounced after their divorce when I was 12. My father moved across the country for a position at Berkeley, while my mother, Jason, and I remained in a comfortable but modest home that seemed increasingly shabby compared to Uncle Robert's steadily growing mansion. Grandma Eleanor had been the family's true north, the person who remembered birthdays without Facebook reminders, who hosted Sunday dinners where everyone was welcome regardless of their bank account balance, who mediated disagreements with wisdom that came from living through a depression and 2 world wars. Her declining health had coincided with a gradual fraying of family connections. Sunday dinners became monthly, then quarterly, then holiday-only gatherings. Phone calls grew less frequent. Family group texts went unanswered. In her final year, as dementia began clouding her once sharp mind, the visits from family dwindled even further. I'd made the 3-hour trip from Chicago every other weekend, and Jason came when his college schedule allowed. My mother visited daily, but the spaces in Grandma's visitor log grew more noticeable as her lucidity decreased, something I'd observed with a mixture of sadness and resentment as I sat beside her bed, reading Jane Austen aloud while she drifted in and out of awareness. The most conspicuous in their absence had been Uncle Robert and Aunt Diane, who always seemed to have business trips or social obligations when care schedules were being arranged. Cousin Jennifer had moved to Los Angeles for her fashion career and called occasionally, but hadn't visited in over a year. Only Michael, who worked for his father but seemed perpetually uncomfortable with the family wealth, had maintained somewhat regular visits, often bringing flowers or small gifts that delighted Grandma even on her haziest days. As Mr. Harrington began reading the formal legal preamble to the will, I glanced around the table, wondering if anyone else was reflecting on their relationship with Grandma in her final years. Michael caught my eye and gave a small, sad smile that suggested he, at least, shared some of my thoughts. The others maintained carefully neutral expressions, the kind people wear when they're expecting their names to be called for something valuable. Whatever Grandma Eleanor had recorded, I suspected it would cut through these practiced facades, and perhaps explain why she had insisted on gathering us one last time through the legal obligation none of us could refuse. I, Eleanor Catherine Morgan, being of sound mind, Mr. Harrington began the standard legal phrasing, his voice measured and clear. He methodically worked through the preliminary sections of the will, addressing outstanding debts, none, funeral arrangements, already executed, and charitable bequests, substantial, including significant donations to the hospital where she had worked and several educational foundations. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly when he reached the section regarding personal property and financial assets. Uncle Robert leaned forward slightly. Aunt Diane stopped fidgeting with her bracelet. Even my mother, who had maintained perfect composure, clasped her hands a bit more tightly on the table. Regarding the Morgan family residence at 47 Lakeview Drive, Mr. Harrington continued, I leave this property, including all furnishings and household items contained therein, to my daughter, Catherine Eleanor Morgan Reed. My mother's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet room. The lakeside home, built by my grandfather in the 1950s, was easily worth several $1,000,000 in today's market. Uncle Robert's face flushed slightly, though he maintained a rigid smile. Furthermore, I establish a trust in the amount of $500,000 for the property's maintenance and upkeep to ensure it remains in the family for future generations. Mr. Harrington continued through several smaller bequests, family jewelry divided among female relatives, including specific pieces for Jennifer and me, art collections and books distributed to various family members based on expressed interests over the years, personal items designated with remarkable specificity, down to Grandpa's fishing tackle going to Jason and her gardening tools to my mother. When he reached the section about Grandma's financial assets, the tension in the room thickened noticeably. Regarding my financial holdings, including stocks, bonds, and liquid assets, Mr. Harrington read, his tone remaining neutral despite the weight of what followed. I have made the following determinations based on careful consideration of both need and relationship. He proceeded to outline a distribution that sent subtle but unmistakable messages. My mother received a substantial portion, as did Jason and I. Michael was granted a trust that would mature in stages, providing him independence from his father's control if he chose to pursue it. Jennifer received a smaller but still significant amount. Most surprising was the allocation to Uncle Robert and Aunt Diane, a relatively modest sum compared to what had been given to others, with the stipulation that it be donated to the hospital's elder care unit in their names. This bequest, Mr. Harrington read from Grandma's will, reflects my desire for Robert and Diane to engage more meaningfully with the care of our community's elderly population, an area that would benefit from their attention. The measured words carried an unmistakable sting. Uncle Robert's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrests of his chair. As for my shares in Morgan Investments, Mr. Harrington continued, addressing what was arguably the most valuable asset. These shall be distributed as follows: 30% to Robert Morgan, who has capably led the company for 15 years, 30% to Catherine Reed, whose perspective has been sorely missed in company decisions, 20% to Michael Morgan, should he wish to continue in the family business, and the remaining 20% to a voting trust controlled jointly by Rebecca and Jason Reed to ensure the next generation has a voice in the company's direction. Uncle Robert's careful composure finally cracked. "This is unexpected," he said, his voice tight. "Mother never indicated she was planning to dilute leadership this way." "The will speaks for itself, Mr. Morgan," Harrington replied evenly. "And Mrs. Morgan has more to say on the matter, which brings us to the video portion of today's proceedings." As the associate dimmed the lights and prepared the projector, the undercurrents of shock, confusion, and in some cases, thinly veiled outrage were palpable. The will had not just distributed assets, it had redistributed power within the family in ways that clearly reflected Grandma's assessment of each person's character and contributions. What none of us realized yet was that the financial revelations were merely the prelude. As the projection screen flickered to life and Grandma Eleanor's face appeared, looking directly into the camera with the clear-eyed determination I remembered from my childhood, we were about to hear truths far more valuable and potentially more devastating than any inheritance. Grandma Eleanor's image on the screen was startling in its clarity and presence. Filmed just 3 weeks before her death, she appeared more lucid than I had seen her in months. She sat in her favorite wingback chair in the sunroom of the lakeside house, wearing a blue cardigan I had given her 2 Christmases ago. Behind her, Lake Michigan stretched like a sheet of silver glass beneath a winter sky. "Well," she began, with the slight smile that had always preceded her most candid observations, "if you're watching this, I've finally worn out. 93 years is a good run by anyone's measure, so no tears on that account, please." Her directness, so characteristic, brought an unexpected lump to my throat. Beside me, Jason shifted in his chair, his usual composure slipping. "Mr. Harrington has just read you my will, which handles the material matters. This recording is for the immaterial ones, the truths, disappointments, and hopes I couldn't properly express in legal language." She adjusted her glasses, a deliberate gesture I'd seen thousands of times. "First, to address the elephant in the room, yes, I was entirely cognizant when making these decisions. Dr. Levine conducted 3 separate competency evaluations in the past year, most recently just before this recording. The paperwork is with Mr. Harrington, should anyone—" Her gaze seemed to fix briefly on Uncle Robert, though of course that was impossible. "Feel the need to question my mental capacity." A slight rustle moved through the room. Uncle Robert cleared his throat, but said nothing. "Now, to matters of family." Grandma straightened slightly in her chair. "The past 3 years have been illuminating. As my body betrayed me and my independence diminished, I discovered who considered me a person and who considered me a future inheritance." The bluntness of her statement hung in the air. I glanced at Michael, whose gaze was fixed on his hands. His regular visits to Grandma had always seemed motivated by genuine affection, but now I wondered if there had been complicated undercurrents I hadn't recognized. "Catherine, my daughter," Grandma continued, her voice softening, "you balanced your own life, work, and children while caring for me with patience I often didn't deserve. The lakeside house is yours not just because you loved it, but because you understood it was never about the property's value. It was about the family memories contained within its walls." My mother's careful composure wavered for the first time, her eyes glistening. "Rebecca and Jason, my devoted grandchildren. Your visits were never duty but genuine connection. Rebecca, reading to me when I could no longer hold books steady. Jason, playing piano in the sunroom during your school breaks, even when I dozed through half your pieces." I felt Jason's shoulder press against mine, a silent recognition of shared experience. "Michael," Grandma continued, "caught between duty to your parents and your own conscience. Your discomfort with wealth has always been visible to me, though you try to hide it. The trust is structured to give you choices your father never offered." Michael's sharp intake of breath was audible. Across the table, Uncle Robert's expression darkened. "Jennifer, so focused on building your new life in California that your old grandmother became an occasional phone call. I understand ambition, dear. I married a man full of it. But remember that careers end while family remains, for better or worse." Grandma's gaze seemed to shift, becoming more direct as she turned to the part of the video that would address the family members who had been most absent in her final years. "And to Robert and Diane?" The room grew impossibly still, as we collectively braced for what would come next. The simple family will reading had evolved into something far more complex, a posthumous reckoning with the quiet betrayals, unspoken resentments, and complicated love that defined our family. And Grandma Eleanor, freed from social niceties by death itself, was about to speak her unfiltered truth. Robert and Diane, Grandma Eleanor continued, her voice taking on a quality I recognized from childhood admonishments, gentle but unyielding. I've considered carefully how to address your absence in my final years. Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably. Aunt Diane's face remained impressively neutral, though a muscle twitched near her jawline. When I began experiencing cognitive difficulties, I heard your explanations. Business commitments, social obligations, the challenge of seeing me diminished. I understood them, even as I recognized them as the comfortable excuses they were. The directness of Grandma's assessment hung in the air. No one moved or spoke as her recorded voice continued. What you never realized, Robert, is that I wasn't simply your mother waiting for visits. I was still Eleanor Morgan, the woman who helped build the very business empire you now consider too demanding to step away from for an afternoon with your dying mother. The words landed with precision, striking directly at the heart of Uncle Robert's carefully constructed self-image as the devoted son who had shouldered the family business responsibilities. I watched you cancel 5 visits in my final months, each time with a perfectly reasonable excuse. Yet you found time for the governor's charity gala, the new yacht club opening, and 3 golf weekends in Scottsdale. Your priorities were transparent, though you likely believed they weren't. Uncle Robert's face had gone from flushed to ashen. Beside him, Aunt Diane reached for her water glass, her hand noticeably unsteady. Diane, Grandma continued, turning her attention to my aunt, you visited exactly twice in my final year. Once to discuss renovating the lakeside house when the time comes, and once to inquire about my mother's pearl collection. Both visits lasted less than 30 minutes. I winced at the precision of Grandma's recollection. Even with her cognitive fluctuations, she had clearly maintained awareness of these painful interactions. Shame on those who forgot me while I was still here to be remembered, Grandma said, her voice not angry but sorrowful. Shame not because you failed to fulfill an obligation, but because you missed the opportunity to know me as I prepared for my final journey, a time when I was perhaps more honest, more reflective, and more myself than I had been in decades of playing family matriarch. The word shame reverberated through the conference room. It wasn't a curse or an attack. It was a simple statement of truth that cut through years of family pretense. Then, unexpectedly, Grandma Eleanor's expression softened, and she leaned slightly toward the camera. But this is not merely an accounting of disappointments. It is an invitation to reflection. Robert, you have built your identity around financial success while neglecting the relationships that give that success meaning. Diane, your focus on social position has come at the expense of authentic connection. These patterns will leave you with precisely what you gave me in my final years. Material comfort surrounded by emotional emptiness. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. The provisions in my will are not punishments. They are opportunities for course correction, chances to reconnect with values that our family has gradually forgotten in pursuit of status and wealth. Grandma Eleanor shifted in her chair, her posture straightening as she prepared to deliver what was clearly the central message of her recording. I've allocated my resources not based on formulas of equality or tradition, but on my assessment of what each of you truly needs for growth. Some need financial security to pursue meaningful work. Others need structured philanthropy to reconnect with compassion. And some, her gaze seemed to fix directly on Uncle Robert, need to recognize that controlling a company is not the same as leading a family. The room had fallen into complete stillness. Mr. Harrington sat motionless, his expression carefully neutral as the recording continued. The younger associate had stopped taking notes, apparently as captivated as the rest of us by Grandma's posthumous intervention. Before I conclude, I want to address you all collectively, Grandma said, her voice taking on a gentler tone. The Morgan family has lost its way. Wealth that was meant to provide opportunity has instead fostered division. Status that should have been used for community good has become an end unto itself. My generation bears responsibility for these failures as much as yours. She paused, and for a moment the only sound was the faint hum of the projector. My final bequest, more important than any property or financial asset, is this message. It is not too late to rebuild what has been broken. Not too late to redefine what the Morgan name means in this community. Not too late to become a family that measures worth by love rather than ledgers. As Grandma Eleanor delivered these words, part indictment, part absolution, part challenge, I felt something shift in the room and within myself. This wasn't simply a will reading or even a posthumous confrontation. It was a moment of reckoning that would forever divide our family history into before and after. A turning point orchestrated by a woman who, even in death, refused to settle for comfortable lies when difficult truths were needed. The screen went dark as Grandma Eleanor's final message concluded, but no one moved to turn on the lights. The darkness seemed appropriate for the moment of collective processing that followed. A shared inhale without the exhale, a stunned silence that contained multitudes. Mr. Harrington finally reached over and switched on a small table lamp, casting the room in gentle amber light that seemed less exposing than the overhead fluorescence would have been. Mrs. Morgan left instructions that you should have time to absorb her message before we proceed with the formal signing of documents, he said quietly. I'll step out for 15 minutes. My associate will remain to answer any procedural questions. As the door closed behind him, the carefully maintained facades began to crack. Aunt Diane was the first to break the silence, her voice tight with controlled anger. Well, that was unnecessarily theatrical. Eleanor always did have a flair for drama. Diane, Uncle Robert's voice held a warning. He hadn't looked up since the video ended, his gaze fixed on his folded hands. What? Are we supposed to sit here and accept being publicly shamed because your mother was bitter about getting old? Everyone gets old. It's not our fault she couldn't accept it gracefully. My mother spoke then, her voice quiet but clear. She wasn't bitter about aging, Diane. She was hurt by abandonment. There's a difference. We did not abandon her, Aunt Diane hissed, color rising in her cheeks. We had responsibilities, commitments. The world doesn't stop because someone enters their 90s. No, I found myself saying, surprised by my own voice entering the conversation. But maybe our priorities should shift when someone we love is clearly approaching their end. Aunt Diane turned to me, eyes narrowed. That's easy for you to say, Rebecca. Teaching high school English hardly compares to the social and business obligations that Robert and I manage. We can't just drop everything to sit bedside for months. I didn't drop everything, I countered, feeling a surprising calm despite the confrontation. I made choices. Every other weekend I drove 3 hours each way. I graded papers in her room while she slept. I rearranged my schedule because those final moments mattered more than my convenience. Cousin Michael, who had been silent throughout, suddenly spoke. Mom, stop. Grandma was right, and we all know it. His voice was quiet but firm. We made excuses. I'm as guilty as anyone. Yes, I visited more than you and Dad, but I still calculated the minimum I could do without feeling too guilty. His honesty hung in the air, surprising us all. Michael had always been the peacekeeper, the one who avoided direct confrontation. The issue isn't who visited most or least, Jason said, breaking his own silence. It's that Grandma saw through the performance of family that we've all been participating in. She called us on our collective bullshit, and now we have to decide how to respond. My brother's bluntness startled a short laugh from me, breaking some of the tension. Even Uncle Robert's mouth twitched slightly, though he quickly suppressed it. I need some air, he said abruptly, standing and straightening his suit jacket with mechanical precision. Diane, come with me, please. As they left the room, an awkward silence fell over those of us remaining. My mother, Jason, Michael, and me. Jennifer had been conspicuously silent throughout, her expression unreadable as she scrolled through her phone beneath the table, perhaps seeking escape from a reality that couldn't be filtered or edited for her Instagram followers. What happens now? Michael asked, directing the question to no one in particular. My mother sighed, suddenly looking older than her 62 years. That depends on whether we hear what Mom was really saying, which was, Jennifer finally spoke, looking up from her phone, that it's not about the money, my mother said simply. It never was. The formal proceedings resumed after Uncle Robert and Aunt Diane returned, their composed expressions betraying nothing of whatever conversation had occurred in the hallway. Documents were signed, inheritance taxes discussed, timelines established for the transfer of assets. Through it all, Grandma Eleanor's message hung in the air like an invisible presence, challenging, uncomfortable, but impossible to ignore. As the meeting concluded, Mr. Harrington handed each of us a sealed envelope. Mrs. Morgan asked that these be distributed after the video viewing. They're personal letters, to be read in private. I tucked mine into my bag, not ready to face whatever individual message Grandma had left for me, especially not in this room with its lingering tension. As we gathered our things and prepared to leave, Uncle Robert surprised me by approaching where Jason and I stood near the door. Your grandmother was, he began, then paused as if searching for the right words. She was correct about certain things. My priorities have not been what they should have been. The admission, however limited, seemed to cost him considerable effort. I nodded, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected moment of vulnerability from a man who had always presented himself as infallible. "Perhaps we could have dinner before you return to Chicago," he continued, addressing me directly. "There are aspects of the company you and Jason should understand if you're to be trust holders." It wasn't an apology or even a direct acknowledgement of Grandma's more painful points, but it was an opening, a small crack in a door that had been firmly closed for years. "I'd like that," I said simply. The family dispersed after that, each processing Grandma's intervention in their own way. My mother invited everyone to the lakeside house, her house now, for an informal gathering that evening, to remember Mom together, rather than separately. To my surprise, everyone accepted, even Aunt Diane, though her agreement came with a comment about having a prior commitment that might require her to leave early. Alone in my hotel room that afternoon, I finally opened Grandma's letter. Her familiar handwriting, shakier than I remembered from birthday cards and holiday notes, filled 2 pages of her preferred cream stationery. "My dearest Rebecca, by now you've heard my public message to the family, necessary though difficult to deliver. This letter is different. Not a reckoning, but a recognition. You visited me 37 times in my final year. I kept count not from neediness, but from gratitude. Each visit was a choice you made, often at significant personal inconvenience. While others saw my decline as something to avoid, you saw it as something to accompany me through. This speaks to your character in ways that make me deeply proud. I've left you your portion of the financial inheritance, but the true bequest is something money cannot buy, the knowledge that you already understand what matters. In a family increasingly defined by acquisition and status, you have maintained your grip on authentic connection and meaningful work. The path you've chosen, teaching literature to young minds, living modestly but purposefully, mirrors choices I might have made had I been braver in my own youth. Your grandfather's ambition and success brought our family many advantages, but also set patterns that have calcified over generations into something Howard and I never intended. The company shares I've directed to you and Jason are not burdens but opportunities. Use your voice in the family business to advocate for what the Morgan name should truly represent in our community. Your perspective, less entangled with wealth, more connected to everyday concerns, is precisely what the company leadership has lacked. And now my final request. Help rebuild this fractured family if you can. Not by conceding to old patterns, but by demonstrating new possibilities. Your mother will need allies in the changes to come. Michael seeks purpose beyond what his parents have prescribed. Even Robert and Diane might find their way to more meaningful lives if shown a path with patience and without judgment. I leave you knowing that my values, not just my assets, have found worthy inheritance in you. With abiding love and complete confidence. Grandma Eleanor. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. The letter was so perfectly her, clear-eyed, perceptive, challenging but kind. It was also a roadmap for the difficult work ahead, acknowledging that Grandma's video had opened wounds that would require careful tending if they were to heal properly rather than simply scabbing over. That evening at the lakeside house, something subtle but significant had shifted in our family dynamic. As we gathered in the living room where so many holiday celebrations had taken place, the performative aspects of our interactions had diminished slightly. Conversations felt more tentative but also more authentic. Uncle Robert mentioned business less, asking Jason genuine questions about his music studies. Aunt Diane, though still maintaining her social armor, actually helped my mother in the kitchen, a small act I couldn't recall witnessing before. Most notably, Michael approached me while I was looking through old photo albums on the window seat. "I've been thinking about Grandma's trust for me," he said, settling beside me. "The structure that gives me independence from Dad's company if I want it." "And?" I prompted when he paused. "I've had ideas for years about community investment initiatives that Dad always dismissed as charity without return. With this trust, I could actually implement them through a separate division or even my own venture." The spark in his eyes reminded me of Grandma Eleanor's expression whenever she discussed her hospital volunteer work, a genuine enthusiasm that no amount of family wealth had ever generated. "She knew," I said, understanding dawning. "She set it up that way deliberately because she saw who you really are beneath the corporate suits and family obligations." Michael nodded, a complex emotion crossing his face. "She saw all of us more clearly than we saw ourselves. Maybe that's the real inheritance, being truly known by someone who loved us anyway." As the evening continued, I observed my family with new eyes, recognizing that Grandma's final intervention, her refusal to leave this world without speaking difficult truths, had created an opening for transformation. Whether we would walk through that opening remained to be seen, but the possibility now existed where before there had been only calcified patterns and comfortable illusions. In her final act, Grandma Eleanor had offered us something far more valuable than her considerable material assets: the opportunity to become the family we could be, rather than remaining the family we had settled for being. 3 months after the will reading, winter had settled over the lakeside house, transforming it into the snow globe scene I remembered from childhood holidays. My mother had invited the entire family for Christmas Eve dinner, a revival of Grandma Eleanor's tradition that had lapsed in recent years. I arrived early to help with preparations, finding my mother in the kitchen arranging Grandma's antique china on a serving tray. "Is that the Haviland set?" I asked, recognizing the delicate blue pattern that had only been used for the most special occasions. She nodded. "Mom always said there was no point in saving beautiful things for theoretical future events. Life happens now," she'd say. "Do you think everyone will come?" I hadn't wanted to ask directly about Uncle Robert and Aunt Diane, but their response to this invitation seemed like an important indicator of whether Grandma's posthumous intervention had created lasting change or merely temporary disruption. "Robert confirmed yesterday," my mother replied, her tone carefully neutral. "He and Diane, plus Michael. Jennifer can't make it back from LA, work commitments apparently, but she sent a rather expensive package of gifts that arrived this morning." The fact that Uncle Robert had accepted the invitation represented progress, however small. In the months since the will reading, the restructuring of Morgan Investments had proceeded with less conflict than anticipated. Uncle Robert had surprised everyone by implementing several of Michael's community investment proposals, perhaps recognizing that social responsibility could enhance rather than detract from the company's standing. Jason arrived next, bringing his boyfriend Thomas for the first time, another small but significant shift. In previous years, the unspoken family expectation had been that appropriate partners attended holiday gatherings, while more casual or less conventional relationships remained separate from family functions. That my brother felt comfortable enough to include Thomas suggested he too sensed a change in the family atmosphere. As we completed the dinner preparations, I found myself in Grandma Eleanor's study, a room my mother had left untouched since inheriting the house. The familiar smell of lemon furniture polish and old books enveloped me as I ran my fingers along the spines of her beloved classic novels. On her desk, a leather-bound journal lay closed, a bookmark protruding from its pages. Without conscious intention, I found myself opening it to the marked page. Grandma's handwriting filled the space, dated just 1 month before her death. "I have made my peace with dying. What troubles me still is the family I leave behind, disconnected from each other and from the values Howard and I hope to instill. My final message is recorded, my will arranged to create opportunity for change. Whether they accept this last gift remains to be seen, but I have done what I can with the time remaining." Perhaps my greatest regret is not speaking these truths while I still had strength to engage the discussions that would follow. Courage failed me until it was too late for conversation, leaving only monologue as my option. A lesson there, though too late for me to benefit from it. The vulnerability in these private thoughts brought tears to my eyes. Even Grandma Eleanor, with all her wisdom and strength, had struggled with the courage to initiate difficult family conversations before crisis forced them. The sound of cars arriving in the driveway pulled me from these reflections. I closed the journal gently and returned it to its place, moving to the window in time to see Uncle Robert helping Aunt Diane navigate the snowy path to the front door, with Michael following behind carrying several wrapped packages. As I watched them approach the house, their expressions a mixture of determination and uncertainty, I understood that this evening represented a crucial moment in our family's evolution. Grandma's recorded message had created the opening, but what happened next would depend on choices we all made in the coming hours. The true test of her final intervention was about to unfold around the dinner table she had presided over for decades, a table where we would either begin rebuilding authentic family connections or retreat back into the comfortable patterns she had so directly challenged. The Christmas Eve dinner began with the familiar awkwardness of a family consciously trying to create a new normal. Conversation remained careful as we passed serving dishes around Grandma Eleanor's table, now presided over by my mother at one end, with Uncle Robert assuming Grandpa Howard's former position at the other, a seating arrangement that acknowledged traditional family hierarchy while subtly affirming my mother's new role as keeper of the family home. "Everything is delicious, Catherine," Aunt Diane offered after several minutes of polite comments about the weather and holiday traffic. Eleanor's recipe for cranberry relish, isn't it? Yes, my mother replied, seeming pleased by Diane's recognition. Mom left all her recipe cards organized alphabetically. I found them in the kitchen drawer last week. She was always meticulously organized, Uncle Robert said, his voice carrying a note of genuine fondness that had been absent in recent years. Even in college, her notes were color-coded and perfectly arranged. Used to drive me crazy when we shared textbooks. This small, humanizing memory of Grandma as a young woman, an anecdote I'd never heard before, created a momentary softening in the atmosphere. What was she like in college? Jason asked, leaning forward with interest. She never talked much about those years. Uncle Robert's expression brightened at the direct question from his nephew. Determined, focused. She was one of just 3 women in the nursing program who were married. Most had to choose between education and family back then, but Mom refused to accept that limitation. That sounds like Grandma, I said, smiling at this glimpse of the young Eleanor who had defied convention decades before it became acceptable to do so. She was also funny, my mother added, surprising me. Not the polite humor she showed in later years, but a sharp wit that could cut through pretension instantly. I remember her reducing Dad's stuffy business associate to stammers with just one perfectly timed comment about his self-importance. Laughter rippled around the table at this image of a more subversive Grandma Eleanor than most of us had known. I wish I'd seen that side of her more, Michael said, a hint of regret coloring his words. By the time I was old enough to really talk with her, she'd already settled into the proper family matriarch role. A brief silence followed this observation, the unspoken acknowledgement that many of us had known only versions of Grandma Eleanor, rather than her complete, complex self. I've been thinking about that a lot since the will reading, Uncle Robert said suddenly, setting down his fork, about how little I actually knew my own mother, especially in her final years. The directness of this statement, so unlike my uncle's usual careful speech, caught everyone's attention. He seemed to struggle internally for a moment before continuing. Mom's video message was difficult to hear, but not because it was untrue. He looked down at his plate, then back up with unexpected vulnerability in his expression. She was right. I prioritized business over being present with her. I told myself it was what she would want, me maintaining the company she and Dad built. But that was a convenient fiction. Aunt Diane reached for his hand, her own composure slipping. We both failed her, Robert. I was so concerned with maintaining our social obligations that I treated your mother like another appointment to be scheduled, rather than family to be treasured. This unprecedented admission from the couple who had been most directly challenged by Grandma's message created a pivotal moment, an opening for authenticity that might never have existed without her intervention. I think, my mother said carefully, that Mom's purpose wasn't to make any of us feel guilty about the past, but to help us see more clearly going forward. She always said regret was useful only if it changed future behavior. She told me something similar in her letter, Jason offered. She wrote that families either evolve or calcify, and she was trying to ensure we had the chance to choose evolution. She said something about calcification in my letter too, Michael said, looking surprised. About breaking patterns before they hardened permanently. One by one, we began sharing insights from Grandma's individual letters, discovering common threads woven through her personalized messages to each of us. What emerged was a realization that her video hadn't been simply an airing of grievances or posthumous settling of scores, but a carefully crafted catalyst intended to break open the family's dysfunction so healing could begin. I've made some decisions, Uncle Robert said when this exchange quieted, about the company and about my personal priorities. We all turned toward him, sensing the significance of whatever would follow. I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations at Morgan Investments. Michael will take over as CEO, with a mandate to implement his community investment initiatives as a core part of our business model, rather than just charitable side projects. Michael's expression registered shock followed by cautious hope. Dad, are you sure? You've always said, I've said many things over the years. Uncle Robert interrupted gently. Some of them were wrong. Mom helped me see that. Too late for me to tell her directly, but not too late to honor her vision for what our family business should represent in the community. He turned to my mother next. Catherine, I'd like you to rejoin the board, as Mom intended. Your perspective has been missing for too long. The tension that had existed between my mother and uncle for decades, rooted in old disagreements about company direction and family values, seemed to diminish visibly as she nodded her acceptance. And Rebecca, Jason, he continued, addressing us directly, your roles as trust holders aren't just ceremonial. We need your outsider perspectives if the company is going to evolve properly. In this moment of genuine connection and realignment, I felt Grandma Eleanor's presence almost tangibly, not as a ghost or supernatural visitation, but as the architect of this transformation. Her final message, with its difficult truths and loving challenges, had created the opening through which authentic family healing could begin. As I looked around the table at these people connected by blood and history, I saw not the perfect family pretense we had maintained for years, but something more valuable, a family willing to acknowledge its brokenness as the first step toward becoming whole. After dinner, we gathered in the living room where the Christmas tree glittered with ornaments collected over generations, many handmade by family members, each with its own story. My mother had placed Grandma Eleanor's photo on the mantel, surrounded by evergreen boughs and candles. Her presence felt like a benevolent witness to the evening's tentative new beginnings. "I found something I think we should share," my mother said, retrieving a small wooden box from the bookshelf. "When I was going through Mom's papers last week, I discovered she'd been recording family memories during her final year." She opened the box to reveal dozens of index cards, each labeled with a family member's name and a date. She couldn't always remember recent events, but her long-term memory remained remarkably clear. Her aide helped her document specific memories about each of us, moments that might otherwise have been lost. My mother selected a card and read, "Robert, age 7, refused to come inside despite thunderstorm warnings because he was determined to finish the fort he was building. When lightning struck nearby, he finally ran in, soaking wet but carrying the tiny American flag he'd made for the fort's roof. The flag can't get struck by lightning, Mom," he explained with complete seriousness. "It wouldn't be respectful." Uncle Robert's startled laugh contained a hint of remembered childhood wonder. "I'd completely forgotten that," he admitted, his eyes bright with emotion. One by one, we took turns reading cards, snapshots of moments Grandma Eleanor had treasured enough to preserve as her own memory began failing. Jason playing piano at his first recital, my hand shaking when I received a writing award in high school. Michael secretly using his allowance to buy groceries for a classmate whose family was struggling. Through these recorded memories, Grandma gave us one final gift. Herself not as the family matriarch dispensing wisdom and judgment, but as a witness who had observed each of us with love, noting moments of character and courage we ourselves had forgotten. As the evening drew to a close, Uncle Robert raised his glass in a toast. "To Mom," he said simply, "who found a way to bring us together even after she left us. And who refused to let us forget her," I added, "until we remembered what family truly means." We drank to Grandma Eleanor, whose final act of love had been to shatter the comfortable illusions that had kept us apart. Not from cruelty, but from the deepest kind of care. The shame she had named in her video message wasn't meant as a final judgment, but as a necessary awakening, painful but purposeful, like setting a broken bone so proper healing could begin. As snow fell gently outside the windows of the lakeside house, the Morgan family took its first real steps toward becoming the family Grandma Eleanor had always believed we could be. Connected by more than inheritance, bound by more than obligation, guided by more than convention. Her final message, "Shame on those who forgot me," had transformed from accusation to invitation, from ending to beginning. And we had, at last, begun to accept that invitation to remember not just her, but the values she had lived by and the family she had tried to build. 1 year later, we gathered again at the lakeside house, now a regular tradition restored. On the mantel beside Grandma Eleanor's photo stood a new addition, a small plaque for the Eleanor Morgan Memorial Wing at the County Hospital's Elder Care Unit, funded jointly by all family members and dedicated to ensuring no senior felt forgotten in their final journey. "She would have appreciated the irony," Uncle Robert observed with a smile, "of having her name on a building because we remembered her message. Thank you for experiencing Grandma's will was read, then her video played. Shame on those who forgot me." If this story about family reconciliation and speaking difficult truths resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you witnessed how end-of-life revelations can transform family dynamics? Or perhaps you've experienced the healing that can come from honest confrontation of long-ignored issues? Share your reflections, because understanding how families navigate conflict and growth helps us all create more authentic connections in our own lives.